The screaming started at exactly 8:17 a.m., the moment Bethany Kruger realized her precious white Mercedes was being dragged away by a tow truck while half the neighborhood watched and filmed. 3 hours earlier, this same woman had taken a crowbar to my brand new Camaro. The sickening crunch of safety glass, the metallic scrape against paint I'd worked 2 years of overtime to afford, $40,000 of dreams turned into a pile of glittering shards in my driveway. But here's what that HOA tyrant didn't know. While she was busy destroying my car, I was busy destroying her entire world. Bank records, forged documents, embezzled community funds, I had it all. And in exactly 12 minutes, the police were going to arrest her for felony fraud. What would you do if some power-drunk Karen destroyed everything you'd worked for? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I need to know how far this justice story spreads, because what happened next changed our entire community forever. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. My name's Darius, and 6 months ago, I was just a regular guy trying to rebuild his life after the worst year of my existence. 52 years old, recently divorced, working as an electrician in suburban Dallas while my ex-wife got the house, the dog, and half my retirement savings. After splitting everything down the middle, I scraped together enough to buy a modest ranch home in Willowbrook Estates, one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every lawn looks identical and everyone pretends to be friends. I thought it would be peaceful. I thought wrong. The first thing I did with what was left of my settlement money? Bought my dream car, a 2024 Camaro SS in Rally Red that cost me $40,000, every penny I had left. I'll never forget that first drive home, windows down, the smell of fresh leather mixing with Texas summer heat, that 405 horsepower V8 engine rumbling like controlled thunder beneath my feet. For the first time since my divorce papers were signed, I felt like myself again. That euphoria lasted exactly 3 days. Enter Bethany Kruger, our self-appointed neighborhood dictator. Picture a woman who looks like she was manufactured in a suburban mom factory, perfectly styled blonde bob that never moved in the wind, business casual outfits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a white Mercedes C-Class she treated like a shrine. Her house squatted at the end of our cul-de-sac like a monument to her ego, the biggest, most ostentatious property in the development, with a lawn so perfect it looked like green carpet installed by obsessive-compulsive robots. Bethany had been HOA president for 6 years, and she ran our little community like her personal fiefdom. The harassment started immediately. Day 4 in my new home, I found a citation in my mailbox. My black mailbox apparently violated aesthetic standards. I needed a brown one to maintain neighborhood harmony. The replacement cost me $89 for a piece of metal that did the exact same job. Then came the lawn violations. Every Tuesday morning, like clockwork, I'd hear the sharp snap of paper being shoved into my mailbox. My grass was 3/4 of an inch too tall, $25 fine. My driveway had oil stains from my work truck, $50 fine. My garden hose wasn't properly stored, another $25. I could taste the bitterness rising in my throat every time I saw her perfect silhouette watching me from her kitchen window, arms crossed, that smug smile playing on her lips like she was enjoying a private joke at my expense. But when she targeted my Camaro, that's when the real war began. That vehicle is inappropriate for our community standards, she announced at my first HOA board meeting, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been challenged. The community center reeked of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant, fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry wasps. Bethany presided over the meeting from behind a folding table like a judge passing sentence. 4 other board members flanked her, middle-aged suburban drones who nodded along with everything she said like bobblehead dolls programmed for agreement. We maintain certain aesthetic expectations here in Willowbrook Estates, she continued, her cold blue eyes fixed on me like laser sights. Sports cars project an undesirable image. Undesirable image. My legally parked car in my own driveway was somehow offensive to her delicate sensibilities. The citation she handed me carried a $200 fine and a threat to place a lien on my property if I didn't remedy the situation. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading every page of our HOA covenants. Coffee turned cold in my mug as I cross-referenced parking regulations with enforcement procedures. What I discovered made my blood boil. Bethany was selectively enforcing rules that didn't even exist in our original documents. Armed with evidence, I returned to the next meeting. The room felt smaller, more hostile, thick with the tension of impending confrontation. I presented my research calmly, logically, showing how her citations violated our own governing documents. Bethany listened with the patience of a predator watching wounded prey struggle. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and delivered the line that changed everything. Some people just don't understand that rules exist for a reason, Darius. Perhaps you'd be happier in a different type of neighborhood. The racial undertone hung in the air like smoke. The board voted 4-1 to uphold every citation. That's when I realized this wasn't about parking or aesthetics. This was about power, control, and putting the undesirable new resident in his place. Bethany Kruger had just declared war on the wrong electrician. 1 week after that humiliating board meeting, I walked out to my driveway and felt my heart drop into my stomach. Deep, deliberate scratches ran along the entire driver's side of my Camaro, jagged gouges that cut through the paint down to bare metal like angry scars across red skin. The morning air should have carried the sweet scent of honeysuckle from my neighbor's fence, but all I could smell was the metallic tang of destroyed dreams and the bitter taste of pure rage rising in my throat. Someone had taken a key or screwdriver and dragged it from headlight to taillight with surgical precision. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a declaration of war. I called the police, fighting to keep my voice steady as Officer Martinez filled out his report with the enthusiasm of someone documenting a parking ticket. "Probably kids," he said, though the calculated nature of the damage screamed otherwise. "No witnesses, no cameras, nothing we can do." The repair estimate made me physically sick. $2,800 to fix damage that my insurance deductible wouldn't even touch. But Bethany had just made her first critical mistake. She'd underestimated a divorced electrician with nothing left to lose. 20 years of electrical troubleshooting experience and way too much time on his hands. That evening, while installing security lighting for a nervous homeowner across town, a job that taught me how motion sensors and camera angles work together, I got a text from my next-door neighbor, Martha Hensley. Martha was 73, lived alone since her husband died, and had the sharpest eyes in the neighborhood. Her message was brief but loaded. "Can you come over? Need to tell you something important." Martha's living room smelled like lavender potpourri and old secrets. She pulled the curtains closed before sitting me down with trembling hands. "I saw who scratched your car, honey," she whispered, glancing toward her window like Bethany might be listening through the walls. It was around midnight. Bethany's boy, Trevor. That 17-year-old was skulking around your driveway with something metal in his hand, looking around like he was afraid of getting caught. My blood pressure spiked so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. "Will you testify to that?" Martha's face crumpled like wet tissue paper. "I can't, Darius. She'll destroy me." Last month, she cited Mrs. Peterson for excessive bird feeders exactly 1 week after Peterson questioned the landscaping expenses at a board meeting. Peterson's house has a for sale sign now. The pattern crystallized in my mind like a perfect electrical circuit diagram. Bethany eliminated threats by making their lives unbearable until they fled. But unlike Martha, unlike Peterson, unlike whoever else had been crushed under her suburban boot, I wasn't running anywhere. While Bethany probably thought she'd scared me into submission, I was already planning my counterattack. See, 20 years of troubleshooting electrical problems teaches you something valuable. When someone tries to cut your power, you don't just fix the damage, you upgrade the entire system. The next morning, I drove to Best Buy and bought the most sophisticated dash cam system they sold, front and rear cameras with motion activation, night vision, and cloud storage backup. From my electrical work, I knew that motion-activated cameras on your own property are completely legal in Texas, and the footage holds up in court as long as they don't point directly into neighbors' windows. My divorce lawyer had hammered that lesson into my head during the custody battle. Document everything, Darius. Your word against theirs means nothing without proof. I spent the weekend running electrical lines and installing the system with the same precision I used on commercial jobs. The satisfying metallic click of screwdrivers against mounting brackets felt like loading ammunition for the war ahead. Each camera was invisible from the street but captured every angle of my driveway in crystal clear 4K resolution. Bethany's response came Monday morning like clockwork. A city code enforcement officer, sporting the same last name, Brad Kruger, probably some inbred cousin, knocked on my door with a clipboard and the dead-eyed expression of someone doing family favors. "Got a complaint about surveillance equipment violating neighbors' privacy," he drawled. I walked him around my property, pointing out exactly where each camera faced. All on my land, all aimed at my vehicles, nothing pointing at neighbors' windows. Brad couldn't find a single violation but promised to monitor the situation, code for, "I'll be back when Bethany tells me to be." That afternoon brought the real intelligence breakthrough. Martha called, her voice shaking with nervous energy. "There's something else, honey." 3 other families moved out in the past 2 years after Bethany targeted them: the Hendersons, the Washingtons, and that young couple with the baby, the Garcias. The systematic harassment followed the same playbook every time: sudden violations for microscopic infractions, anonymous complaints to city services, insurance companies mysteriously receiving safety reports about their properties. Challenge Bethany's authority, face escalating torment until fleeing became the only escape. "But here's the crucial part," Martha whispered. "The previous treasurer, Edgar Williams, tried questioning expenses before he moved. Bethany buried him under roof structural violations that 3 different contractors said were complete fabrications. My electrician's brain started connecting the real circuit here. Bethany wasn't just drunk on power, she was covering up something big enough to destroy lives over. And Edgar Williams, wherever he'd fled to, held the keys to bringing down her entire operation. That night, I sat in my garage organizing evidence while the smell of motor oil and determination filled the air. But as I locked up, I had no idea my new cameras were about to record something that would flip this entire war on its head. 3 nights later, my phone exploded with motion alerts at 2:17 a.m. Half asleep and expecting to see a raccoon, I pulled up the live feed and nearly launched my phone across the bedroom. There, crouched beside my Camaro like some deranged suburban gremlin, was Bethany Kruger herself. Not her punk kid, not some random vandal. The HOA president was methodically carving lines into my rear quarter panel with a landscaping edger from the community shed. Her perfectly manicured nails gripped the tool handle while her $200 athleisure outfit caught the streetlight, and that distinctive wedding ring, a gaudy 3-carat monstrosity, glinted as she worked with surgical precision. The metallic scraping sound drifted through my bedroom window like the devil's own fingernails on a chalkboard. Each deliberate gouge was calculated for maximum financial damage, and this psychopath was enjoying every second of it. I could actually see her smiling in the infrared footage as she destroyed thousands of dollars of custom paintwork. Every fiber of my being screamed to charge outside and drag her away from my car by that perfect blonde bob, but my divorce lawyer's voice echoed in my head. "Emotion destroys evidence, Darius. Stay calm, document everything, let them hang themselves." So I lay there recording this felony in real time, watching a 50-year-old suburbanite commit crimes with the dedication of a professional car thief. The footage was damning, but I had a problem. Local cops treated neighbor disputes like radioactive waste, especially when the accused sponsors their annual barbecue and has the mayor's personal cell number. I needed nuclear-level evidence before making my move. Bethany's next escalation arrived by certified mail the following afternoon, delivered with the bureaucratic smugness only HOA boards can achieve. Emergency violation notice. Unauthorized vehicle modifications detected. Aftermarket exhaust system violates community noise ordinances per section 4.7b. Vehicle must be returned to factory specifications or permanently removed from property within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate professional towing at owner's expense plus administrative fees. The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally trying to steal my car through paperwork after failing to destroy it with midnight vandalism. The sharp scent of desperation hung around that letter like cheap perfume mixed with pure evil. But while this suburban terrorist thought she was closing her trap, I was about to discover the nuclear bomb that would vaporize her entire operation. That evening, Martha nervously approached my front door carrying what looked like a state secret. "There's someone you need to meet," she whispered, glancing around like we were planning a Cold War prisoner exchange. "Edgar Williams is back in town, and he's been waiting years for someone like you." We met Edgar at a dingy coffee shop 30 minutes outside our neighborhood, where the bitter aroma of over-roasted beans matched the taste of institutional corruption. Edgar was a skeletal man in his 60s who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of terrible knowledge for far too long. "She didn't just steal from the community," Edgar said, his hands trembling as he opened a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Bethany Kruger has been running a sophisticated embezzlement operation for 3 years. Fake invoices, shell companies, equipment purchases that never happened. We're talking about $45,000 minimum." My blood turned to ice water as he spread documents across the sticky coffee shop table. Bank statements, forged contractor invoices, payments to companies that existed only on paper. The most damning evidence was a business registration for Willowbrook Maintenance Solutions, filed under Bethany's maiden name, Bethany Morrison, with her home address listed as the corporate headquarters. Every month, $500 to $2,000 gets funneled through fake landscaping contracts, Edgar continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. The timing matches her Mercedes payments perfectly. She's been financing her lifestyle with stolen community funds while terrorizing anyone who asks questions. But here's where the story took a twist that made my electrician's brain spark with pure fury. Edgar had tried to expose her before. I filed a police report, contacted the state attorney general, even reached out to local news. That's when the real harassment started. Suddenly my roof needed $30,000 in emergency structural repairs according to inspectors she brought in. My homeowner's insurance got mysteriously canceled after anonymous reports about foundation problems that didn't exist. The woman was running a criminal enterprise from her HOA throne, using community authority like a medieval weapon to crush anyone who threatened her income stream. But she'd made one fatal error. She'd targeted someone with nothing left to lose and the technical skills to document everything. Edgar slid the complete evidence package across the table. I kept copies of everything: bank records, fraudulent invoices, correspondence with contractors who never stepped foot on our property. I've been waiting 3 years for someone strong enough to finish what I started. That night, I spread Edgar's evidence across my kitchen table under harsh fluorescent light, the papers rustling like whispered promises of justice. Bethany had built herself a perfect suburban crime syndicate, but she'd just handed me the keys to her kingdom. Tomorrow morning, she expected me to surrender my car and crawl away defeated. Instead, I was about to detonate her entire world, and my security cameras would capture every beautiful second of her destruction. I set 3 alarms for 6 a.m. and went to sleep smiling for the first time since this war began. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that smells like burning leaves and impending justice. I was nursing black coffee on my front porch, watching steam rise from my mug like incense for the war gods, when Officer Rodriguez's patrol car crunched over the gravel in my driveway. Rodriguez stepped out looking like a man who'd rather be chasing real criminals than mediating suburban drama. He was decent enough, mid-30s, actually listened instead of just waiting for his turn to talk, with the weary eyes of someone who'd refereed enough neighbor disputes to smell bullshit through 3 layers of perfume and legal threats. "Let's see what we've got," he said, photographing the fresh gouges in my Camaro's paint while I handed him printouts of the security footage. The images were crystal clear. Bethany crouched beside my car at 2:17 a.m., her wedding ring catching streetlight as she systematically destroyed my property with community tools. Rodriguez whistled low. "This is solid evidence, but here's the reality. Property damage between neighbors rarely gets prosecuted unless someone's bleeding or there's serious money involved. The DA's office treats this stuff like expensive therapy sessions." Before I could respond, the sharp staccato of designer heels on asphalt announced the arrival of our neighborhood's premier psychopath. Bethany materialized like a perfectly groomed angel of death, wearing a cream-colored business suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and carrying a leather portfolio that screamed, "I have lawyers on speed dial." "Officer Rodriguez, thank heavens!" she gasped, pressing one manicured hand to her throat in a gesture so theatrical it belonged on a soap opera. "I've been absolutely terrified about the escalating situation with our troubled new resident." What followed was a masterclass in suburban manipulation. Crocodile tears gathered in her blue eyes as she produced a collection of photographs from her portfolio. Pictures of me checking my mail, washing my car, trimming hedges, even carrying groceries from my truck. Normal human activities transformed into concerning stalking behavior through her twisted lens. "He's been conducting surveillance on my property, officer, taking photographs, making veiled threats about evening the score over perfectly legitimate HOA violations." Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "As a woman living alone, I can't help but fear for my safety. Last night I witnessed suspicious activity around his vehicle, but I was too frightened to investigate properly. The sheer audacity left me speechless. She was standing 15 feet from the car she'd personally vandalized, spinning a victim narrative while evidence of her crimes sat in Rodriguez's hands. The bitter taste of concentrated evil filled my mouth, but my divorce attorney's voice echoed in my head. "Never interrupt your enemy when they're destroying themselves." So I smiled, actually smiled, like she'd just told me the funniest joke I'd ever heard. "Officer Rodriguez," I said with the calm politeness of a funeral director, "I deeply appreciate Mrs. Kruger's commitment to neighborhood safety. That's precisely why I installed those security cameras, to protect everyone's property from vandalism and criminal activity." Bethany's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flicker of confusion that crossed her face. She'd scripted this confrontation expecting an explosive outburst, a public meltdown that would validate her dangerous neighbor narrative. My serene response clearly wasn't in her playbook. "I'm sure we can resolve this like civilized adults," I continued, my voice carrying the reasonable tone of someone offering to help an elderly person cross the street. "After all, we're all invested in maintaining our wonderful community standards." Rodriguez looked between us like a boxing referee trying to prevent a riot. "Look, I'll file the vandalism report, but without willing witnesses, this becomes civil territory. Maybe you folks should work this out before lawyers get involved." After he left, Bethany lingered on the sidewalk like a shark sensing blood in the water, probably expecting me to crack under pressure or beg for mercy. Instead, I walked calmly into my house and closed the door with the gentle click of someone putting away fine china. Through my window, I watched her perfect composure fracture as her carefully orchestrated drama dissolved into nothing. That evening delivered the nuclear bomb that would end this war. Martha arrived with reinforcements. Helen Morrison, a retired teacher exiled over phantom garden violations, and James Crawford, a jazz musician persecuted for noise complaints that violated no actual city ordinances. We assembled in my living room like revolutionaries planning the overthrow of a suburban dictator, sharing war stories that revealed the true scope of Bethany's criminal enterprise. Then James dropped the information that made my heart sing with anticipation. My brother Rico owns the towing company contracted with our HOA. Bethany's been authorizing tows for months but never paying the bills. Rico's owed $3,800 and he's about to file liens. The beautiful irony hit me like lightning. Bethany had weaponized the towing company against residents while screwing them over financially, but unpaid towing fees create automatic liens against any vehicle owned by the debtor, including that pristine white Mercedes she worshipped like a chrome-plated idol. I called Rico that night. His voice carried the weary rage of a small business owner getting systematically robbed by bureaucrats. "Darius," he said after I explained the situation, "tomorrow morning's going to be very interesting. We arranged to meet at 7 a.m. Bethany's ultimatum expired at 8 a.m. sharp, and she was expecting to find my Camaro gone when she made her victory lap. Instead, she was about to learn that some wars end with the enemy losing everything they hold sacred. The next morning, Rico Crawford arrived at my doorstep carrying a banker's box that looked like it contained the nuclear codes. He was a compact bulldog of a man with hands that could strangle a carburetor and eyes that had seen enough corporate bullshit to fuel a small power plant. "Your HOA president is about to have the worst day of her miserable life," Rico announced, setting the box on my kitchen table with the ceremony of someone placing evidence at a murder trial. "But first, you need to see how deep this rabbit hole really goes." What Rico pulled from that box made my coffee taste like liquid betrayal. Invoice after invoice for legitimate towing services, work his company had actually performed, each one signed by Bethany's distinctive flourish. The numbers weren't massive individually, but they painted a picture of systematic theft. $3,647 in unpaid bills, stretching back 18 months. "Here's where it gets beautiful," Rico said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a detective solving a cold case. "I got suspicious about why she kept promising payment but never delivering, so I did some digging into your HOA's bank records." He slapped down a different stack of papers that made my blood pressure spike into the stratosphere. "Every month like clockwork, your HOA cuts checks to Crawford Towing for the exact amounts they owe me. But guess what? I never see a dime." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. Someone else is cashing those checks. "Meet Crawford Towing Solutions," Rico said, producing business registration documents. "Filed 6 months after Bethany became HOA president, registered under the name Rebecca Morrison," that's her sister, "with a P.O. box address in the next county. This bitch has been using my company's reputation to steal from your community while stiffing me on legitimate bills." The audacity was staggering, but Rico wasn't finished dismantling Bethany's suburban crime empire. He spread out bank statements that read like a manual for white-collar theft disguised as community management. "Your friend Edgar was right about missing money, but he severely underestimated the scope. We're not talking $30,000. This woman has embezzled over $75,000 in 3 years. The evidence was overwhelming. Phantom landscaping contracts, fake security services, equipment purchases that existed only on paper, and monthly payments to Willowbrook Property Management, a company that provided absolutely nothing except a way to funnel community funds into Bethany's personal accounts. But the revelation that made my hands shake with pure rage came next. Remember all those insurance cancellations? Martha's policy, Helen's mysterious foundation problems, Edgar's roof repairs that 3 contractors said were bullshit? Rico's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Your HOA president has been filing false insurance reports on residents who oppose her, using her real estate license to pressure companies into dropping coverage. He produced a folder marked Insurance Fraud Documentation that contained correspondence between Bethany and multiple insurance companies, fabricated safety reports, falsified property inspections, coordinated campaigns to destroy the financial stability of anyone who dared question her authority. She's been weaponizing the entire suburban infrastructure against her own neighbors, Rico continued, his voice shaking with controlled fury. Insurance companies, city code enforcement, contractor networks, she's turned them all into weapons for eliminating threats to her criminal operation. The scope was breathtaking. Bethany hadn't just been stealing money, she'd been systematically destroying lives to protect her theft. The Mercedes payments, the house renovations, her son's private school tuition, even her country club membership, all financed with money stolen from the very people she was supposed to serve. I stared at evidence that could send someone to federal prison for 20 years. Mail fraud, insurance fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, racketeering. Bethany Kruger had built the perfect suburban crime syndicate, hidden behind manicured lawns and HOA bylaws. "So what's the plan?" Rico asked, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of someone about to collect a very overdue debt with interest. I looked at the mountain of evidence spread across my kitchen table and felt something cold and precise settle in my chest. We're going to end Bethany Kruger's reign of terror in front of the entire neighborhood, and we're going to make sure she never hurts anyone again. The war was about to become a public execution, and I was about to deliver justice with surgical precision. My garage had been transformed into a war room that would make CIA operatives weep with envy. The concrete floor was ice cold under my knees as I crawled between evidence stations, spreading documents across every surface like a madman mapping the downfall of a dictator. Edgar's financial records covered my workbench. Rico's invoices were taped to tool cabinets like battle plans, and insurance fraud evidence hung from a corkboard like a serial killer's timeline. The air reeked of motor oil, photocopier toner, and the metallic taste of impending justice. Martha arrived at dawn carrying coffee that could resurrect the dead and wearing the grim determination of someone who'd finally found her courage. "I called every household that's been targeted," she announced, settling into a folding chair with the authority of a resistance leader. 15 families confirmed they'll testify. People aren't just angry anymore, Darius. They're ready for blood. Edgar shuffled in next, clutching a briefcase containing 3 years of evidence he'd been too terrified to use until now. His hands still trembled, but his voice carried the steel of a man who'd rediscovered his spine. "I brought everything. Bank statements, canceled checks, correspondence with state investigators who buried my complaints because Bethany had connections." Our secret weapon arrived in a sleek BMW at exactly 7 a.m. Attorney Sarah Kim, a predatory legal shark who specialized in devouring HOA tyrants for breakfast. She'd driven down from Dallas after Rico's frantic call, and her first words made my heart sing. "This is the most comprehensive HOA fraud documentation I've ever seen. We're not pursuing civil violations. This is federal racketeering territory." Sarah's briefcase contained legal ammunition that could level small cities. She spread documents across my workbench while explaining how Bethany's empire would crumble. Fraudulent liens can be challenged and removed immediately under Texas Property Code Section 51(1). But when HOA officers commit mail fraud, and sending fake invoices through postal service absolutely qualifies, we're talking federal felony charges with 20-year minimum sentences. The strategy session felt like watching a master strategist plan the siege of Troy. Multiple fronts would attack simultaneously. Criminal charges filed with federal prosecutors, civil litigation seeking treble damages, professional licensing complaints to destroy her real estate career, and media exposure to ensure public humiliation. Bethany wouldn't have time to shred evidence or flee to non-extradition countries. Rico had converted my garage corner into a professional surveillance center, 4K cameras, directional microphones, even a drone for aerial documentation. My insurance requires video evidence for disputed tows, he explained, adjusting equipment with filmmaker precision. Everything tomorrow gets recorded in broadcast quality with synchronized audio. The technology deployment was military grade. My electrical background had taught me that Texas allows single-party consent recording, meaning I could legally capture any conversation without Bethany's knowledge. We positioned backup devices throughout the neighborhood, uploaded everything to cloud storage in real time, and stored evidence copies in 3 different states to prevent tampering. Edgar had evolved from terrified victim to meticulous forensic accountant, teaching me financial audit techniques that should be required knowledge for every homeowner. Reserve funds are legally restricted to capital improvements and emergency repairs, he explained, highlighting relevant state statutes. Mixing reserves with operating accounts is automatic embezzlement, and using community funds for personal expenses violates every fiduciary duty that exists. The audit methods he demonstrated were shockingly simple. Homeowners can demand quarterly financial statements, require contractor receipts, and verify that board meetings follow statutory notification requirements. Most HOA abuse flourishes because residents don't understand their rights, and corrupt boards depend on that ignorance to operate criminal enterprises without oversight. Rico's professional expertise added devastating tactical advantages. Legal towing requires specific procedures, clear signage, 72-hour advance notice, photographic documentation of violations. 90% of HOA tows are technically vehicle theft because they skip mandatory steps. His advice was pure gold. Always photograph your car's exact position before leaving, document missing or unclear signage, and demand complete paperwork before paying any towing fees. The timing coordination required Swiss watch precision. Morning rush hour would maximize neighborhood witnesses, school bus schedules guaranteed family presence, and Bethany's obsessive routine, mapped through weeks of surveillance, showed she always conducted territorial patrols at exactly 8:15 a.m. Sarah had already briefed Channel 8's investigative reporter Lisa Martinez, whose HOA corruption exposés had won 3 Emmy Awards. Lisa arrives with full camera crew at 8:30, Sarah explained, her predatory smile promising television gold. HOA abuse stories generate massive ratings, especially with dramatic footage and clear villains getting destroyed in real time. Our media strategy was elegant brutality. Document everything live, provide journalists with evidence packages that could sink battleships, and use social media amplification to spread the story nationally. The hashtag Willowbrook fraud was already trending locally thanks to Martha's neighborhood resistance network. But the psychological warfare element would truly obliterate Bethany's soul. Every detail was designed to trigger her control obsessions while publicly stripping away her power in front of the people she'd terrorized. Public humiliation was her deepest fear, and we were about to serve it up with a federal indictment chaser. At 2 a.m., I stood surrounded by the instruments of suburban warfare and felt something I hadn't experienced since my divorce papers were signed: absolute certainty of total victory. Tomorrow morning, Bethany Kruger's criminal empire would collapse in spectacular fashion, creating a cautionary tale that would protect communities nationwide. Every document secured, every witness prepared, every camera positioned for maximum devastation. We weren't just winning this war, we were about to make history. At 6:30 a.m., I watched through my kitchen window as Bethany's perfectly manicured world began to crack. She emerged from her house in a pristine white bathrobe, probably worth more than most people's monthly salary, and immediately noticed the unusual activity brewing in our normally sleepy neighborhood. Rico's massive tow truck sat parked legally on the public street like a mechanical vulture, its diesel engine rumbling with barely contained power. The panic in her body language was delicious to watch. She speed-dialed someone, probably her tame board members, while pacing her driveway in designer slippers that had never touched actual pavement before today. Through my security cameras, I could see her gesturing frantically at Rico's truck, her voice carrying across the morning air with the shrill desperation of someone realizing their perfect crime was about to explode. Within 20 minutes, the emergency board meeting materialized in her living room like a gathering of co-conspirators trying to prevent a mutiny. Martha's intelligence network was feeding me real-time updates through text messages. 4 board members arrived, lots of shouting. Someone mentioned lawyers. But while Bethany thought she was organizing damage control, I was watching her dig her grave deeper with every desperate move she made. At 7:15, she burst from her house wearing a business suit that screamed, "I'm definitely not guilty of anything," and marched directly toward Rico's truck with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. The morning dew crunched under her designer heels as she approached Rico like a suburban general confronting enemy forces. "You need to move this truck immediately," she demanded, her voice carrying that particular brand of entitled authority that made my teeth ache. "This is private property and you're trespassing." Rico stepped out of his cab with the unhurried movements of someone who'd dealt with entitled customers for 20 years. He was a compact mountain of muscle-wearing coveralls that had seen honest work, and his smile carried the satisfaction of someone about to collect a very overdue debt. "Ma'am, I'm parked on a public street with proper documentation," Rico replied, his voice calm but carrying undertones of barely controlled satisfaction. "I'm here to collect payment for services rendered to your HOA, $3,800 in unpaid invoices." Bethany's face cycled through expressions like a broken slot machine. Confusion, anger, dismissal, then back to panic as she realized this wasn't going according to any script she'd prepared. "That's impossible. Our treasurer handles all payments. There must be some accounting error." "No error," Rico said, producing a folder thick enough to choke a horse. 18 months of legitimate towing services, all authorized by your signature, 0 payments received. But here's the interesting part. Your HOA bank statements show monthly payments to Crawford Towing Solutions. Know anything about that company? The color drained from Bethany's face like someone had opened a valve. Her sister's fraudulent company had just been exposed in front of witnesses, and I could practically hear her calculating how many federal laws she'd broken. The morning air suddenly felt electric with the tension of a cornered predator realizing the trap had already snapped shut. That's when Officer Rodriguez arrived, responding to what was probably Bethany's frantic 911 call about harassment and trespassing. Rodriguez stepped out of his patrol car looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, carrying the weary expression of someone who recognized this address from yesterday's vandalism report. "Morning, folks," Rodriguez said, his tone professionally neutral. "Got a call about a disturbance. What seems to be the problem?" Bethany immediately switched into victim mode with the smooth transition of a professional con artist. "Officer, this man is harassing me and blocking access to my property. I've asked him repeatedly to leave, but he's making threats about money we don't owe." Rico's response was pure professional satisfaction. He handed Rodriguez the complete documentation package, unpaid invoices with Bethany's signatures, bank records showing payments to fraudulent companies, correspondence proving systematic deception. "Officer, I'm attempting to collect legitimate debts through legal channels. These documents show 18 months of unpaid bills and evidence of fraud." Rodriguez studied the paperwork with growing interest while Bethany's composure crumbled like a sandcastle in a hurricane. Her perfect suburban facade was disintegrating in real time, and the morning sun seemed to highlight every crack in her armor. But the real earthquake hit when Martha emerged from her house carrying a manila envelope thick with additional evidence, followed by Edgar and 3 other neighbors who'd been terrorized into silence for years. The small group approached like witnesses arriving at a public execution, and Bethany's eyes widened with the horror of someone realizing their victims had organized. "Officer Rodriguez," Martha said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months, "we have additional information about financial misconduct that might interest you." The documents Martha handed over contained evidence of insurance fraud, systematic harassment, and embezzlement that made Rico's billing dispute look like parking tickets. Rodriguez's expression shifted from bored civil enforcement to serious criminal investigation as he realized he was looking at evidence of federal crimes. Bethany stood frozen in her driveway like a deer caught in headlights, watching her carefully constructed empire collapse around her designer heels. The woman who terrorized an entire neighborhood was about to discover that some predators eventually become prey. And the best part? We were just getting started. By 7:45 a.m., our normally quiet suburban street had transformed into a battlefield that reeked of diesel exhaust, desperation, and the sweet smell of justice, finally being served. Bethany stood in the eye of this growing storm, her designer business suit wrinkled from nervous sweating, watching her perfect world disintegrate like sugar in acid rain. Her next move reeked of pure panic disguised as political power. She jabbed at her phone with trembling fingers, speed dialing what she clearly believed was her get-out-of-jail-free card. "Mayor Davidson, this is Bethany Kruger from Willowbrook Estates. I need immediate intervention to stop this media circus from destroying our community's reputation. Even from 30 feet away, we could hear the mayor's aide deliver the political kiss of death, a polite but firm statement that the mayor's office doesn't interfere in civil HOA disputes. When Bethany hung up, her face had turned the color of old cottage cheese, and her hands shook like someone experiencing withdrawal from suburban power. But this woman was nothing if not creatively vicious in her desperation. She turned to Officer Rodriguez with the entitled fury of someone who'd never heard the word no from anyone who mattered. Officer, I want you to understand that certain city officials have special arrangements with our association. This harassment could have serious political consequences for everyone involved. The implied blackmail hung in the morning air like sulfur from hell itself. Rodriguez's expression shifted from professional patience to barely controlled disgust. In one sentence, Bethany had managed to threaten a police officer while implicating herself in municipal corruption. That's when her co-conspirators arrived like rats fleeing a sinking ship. 3 board members who'd been summoned by her frantic emergency calls approached the crowd with the nervous energy of people who'd just realized they might be accessories to federal crimes. Board Secretary Jennifer Walsh took one look at the evidence mountain spread across Rico's truck and immediately started throwing Bethany under the bus with the enthusiasm of someone avoiding prison time. I never saw any of these invoices, she announced loud enough for the news cameras. Bethany always claimed the treasurer handled all financial decisions independently. Board member Tom Rodriguez was even more brutal in his betrayal. We were told these were routine expenses approved by previous boards. Nobody ever showed us actual contractor agreements or receipts. The panic in his voice was delicious as he realized his signature might be on fraudulent documents that could send him to federal prison. The beautiful thing about watching criminal conspiracies collapse is how quickly loyalty evaporates when faced with 20-year sentences. Within minutes, Bethany's hand-picked board was providing Officer Rodriguez with testimony that contradicted every lie she'd told about proper procedures and unanimous approval. But Bethany's final gambit was her most spectacularly unhinged move yet. She called Channel 8 News directly, apparently believing she could control the narrative by striking first. I need to report a coordinated harassment campaign by dangerous neighbors who are making terroristic threats against community leaders, she told whoever answered, her voice cracking with hysteria. The cosmic irony was breathtaking. She was calling the exact investigative team that Sarah Kim had already briefed about her crimes. The sound of news van engines rumbling in the distance made Bethany's face light up with false hope, like someone who thought the cavalry was coming to rescue her instead of film her public execution. Investigative reporter Lisa Martinez stepped out of that news van like a predatory shark smelling blood in suburban waters. She carried a folder containing every piece of evidence we'd provided, and her opening question was pure television gold that would probably win her another Emmy. Mrs. Kruger, would you care to comment on documented allegations that you've systematically embezzled over $75,000 from community funds while using your position to terrorize residents into silence? The look on Bethany's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air while high-definition cameras captured every microsecond of her psychological collapse for evening news broadcasts. But the moment that truly broke her came when Edgar stepped forward carrying his briefcase of financial evidence like a briefcase full of kryptonite. I have 3 years of bank statements proving systematic theft, he announced to the cameras with the quiet dignity of someone finally getting justice. This woman destroyed my life to cover up her crimes, and I have documented proof of every single transaction. The crowd had swelled to over 40 neighbors, many filming with phones as our suburban dictator realized she was completely surrounded by witnesses, evidence, and the consequences of her own evil actions. The woman who'd ruled through fear and intimidation was experiencing her own terror for the first time in years. Officer Rodriguez made the call that would end her life as she knew it. Dispatch, I need detectives and federal investigators at Willowbrook Estates immediately. We have evidence of mail fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, and conspiracy involving potential municipal corruption. Those words, federal investigators, hit Bethany like a physical slap. She staggered toward her house, probably planning to shred evidence or flee the country. But Rico's tow truck was already positioning itself behind her precious white Mercedes with mechanical precision. "Ma'am," Rico called out with professional politeness that dripped satisfaction like honey, Your vehicle is subject to immediate impoundment due to unpaid liens totaling $4,200 plus accumulated interest and administrative fees. The hook attached to her Mercedes with the finality of divine judgment. As that chrome symbol of stolen prosperity lifted off the ground, Bethany released a sound that was part banshee wail, part death rattle, and entirely the collapse of a criminal empire. The neighborhood erupted in applause that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. By 8:30 a.m., our suburban battlefield had reached critical mass. Over 60 residents filled the street like an angry mob finally witnessing their tormentor's public execution. The air crackled with electricity from news cameras, diesel engines, and the pure voltage of justice being served in high definition. Children pressed against school bus windows while their parents filmed everything on phones that would make this moment internet legend. Bethany stood trapped on her own front porch like a cornered animal, her designer suit now wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat that no amount of expensive perfume could mask. The woman who'd terrorized our community from behind manicured lawns and legal paperwork was about to face the consequences of her crimes in front of everyone she'd victimized. Federal investigators had arrived in unmarked sedans that screamed government authority, followed by county prosecutors who'd been monitoring the situation through Sarah Kim's connections. The sight of federal badges made several board members immediately request lawyers, while Bethany's face cycled through every stage of grief at hyperspeed. That's when she made her final, desperate attempt to control the narrative. Bethany grabbed a microphone from the Channel 8 news crew and climbed onto her porch railing like some deranged suburban politician making a campaign speech. "Neighbors, friends," she shouted, her voice carrying the shrill desperation of someone drowning in their own lies. "What you're witnessing is a coordinated attack on our community values by outside agitators who want to destroy everything we've built together." The crowd responded with jeers and laughter that echoed off every house in the development. Someone in the back shouted, "What about our stolen money, Bethany?" While another voice called out, "Tell us about your sister's fake company." But I wasn't about to let this criminal hijack her own public execution. I stepped forward and took the microphone from her trembling hands with the calm authority of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. 3 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the crowd, this woman began systematically stealing from our community while using her position to destroy anyone who questioned her authority. The crowd fell silent as I held up the evidence that would end her life as she knew it. Bank records show $75,000 in embezzled funds, insurance fraud targeting families who dared to speak up, fake companies designed to launder stolen money through her sister's accounts. Bethany tried to interrupt, but her voice cracked like breaking glass. "These are lies. Fabrications by a disgruntled resident who has video footage of you personally vandalizing my car at 2 a.m, I cut her off, holding up my phone displaying the crystal clear security footage. "Who has your signature on fraudulent invoices? Who has testimony from contractors you never paid and residents you systematically terrorized?" The crowd erupted in applause that shook windows throughout the neighborhood. Martha stepped forward with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "This woman canceled my insurance with false reports. She forced me to choose between fighting lies and losing my home." Edgar's voice carried the weight of 3 years of suppressed fury. "She buried me under fabricated violations when I tried to audit the finances, made my life hell until I fled like a refugee from my own neighborhood." Helen Morrison, who'd driven back from her new home 2 counties away just for this moment, spoke with the quiet dignity of someone finally getting justice. "She destroyed my garden, then fined me for the damage, used my love of flowers as a weapon against me. One by one, victims stepped forward to testify about years of systematic abuse while cameras captured every word for posterity. The crowd grew angrier with each revelation, and Bethany shrank smaller with every testimony until she looked like a wilted flower in expensive clothing. That's when Federal Agent Martinez stepped onto the porch carrying handcuffs and a warrant that had been expedited through channels Sarah Kim had spent years cultivating. "Bethany Morrison Kruger, you're under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and racketeering under federal RICO statutes." The Miranda rights echoed across our neighborhood like a funeral dirge for suburban tyranny. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The crowd erupted in cheers that could probably be heard in the next county. Children on the school bus pressed against windows while parents held up phones to capture this historical moment of community justice. But the absolute perfect climax came when Rico's tow truck finally lifted Bethany's Mercedes completely off the ground. As that white symbol of stolen prosperity swayed in the morning air, the woman who'd ruled through fear and intimidation was led away in handcuffs past the car she'd bought with our stolen money. "This is what happens," I said into the news microphones, "when communities stand together against corruption, when neighbors support each other instead of living in fear, when good people refuse to be silenced by bullies in business suits." The applause was deafening, but the most beautiful sound was something we hadn't heard in our neighborhood for years: the laughter of people who were finally free. Officer Rodriguez closed his report with the most satisfying words I'd ever heard. "Suspect is in federal custody, community threat neutralized, investigation ongoing." Our long nightmare was finally over, but the celebration was just beginning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my driveway watching kids play safely in the street for the first time in years, and the transformation of our community still takes my breath away. The morning air carries the sound of laughter instead of fear, and neighbors actually wave to each other instead of hurrying inside to avoid confrontation. Bethany's sentencing hearing was everything we could have hoped for and more. Federal Judge Patricia Williams didn't hold back. 3 years in federal prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution totaling $127,000, including interest, penalties, and legal fees. The woman who'd terrorized families from behind her HOA throne was led away in an orange jumpsuit that matched her new reality perfectly. The federal conviction meant no early release, no house arrest, no country club minimum security. Bethany was experiencing real consequences for the first time in her privileged life, and every day of her sentence represented justice for another family she'd destroyed. Our community's financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. The frozen bank accounts contained not just the stolen funds, but 3 years of accumulated interest that Bethany had been too arrogant to spend. Property liens secured additional damages from the sale of her house, which sold at auction for enough money to completely renovate our neglected common areas. My Camaro received the full restoration it deserved, courtesy of a community fundraiser that raised twice the repair costs within a week. The excess money went toward a neighborhood legal defense fund, ensuring no future HOA board could terrorize residents without facing organized resistance. The car now gleams in my driveway like a symbol of what happens when you fight back against bullies. The new HOA board operates with the transparency of a nonprofit organization. Monthly meetings are live-streamed, financial records are posted online quarterly, and every major decision requires community input. Edgar was elected treasurer by unanimous vote, and his first act was implementing audit procedures that make embezzlement virtually impossible. Martha has become our neighborhood's unofficial historian, documenting Bethany's crimes for a book about suburban corruption that's already attracted interest from major publishers. Her courage in speaking up first inspired dozens of other residents to share their own stories of abuse and intimidation. Rico's business has exploded with new clients after his role in exposing the fraud became local legend. Honest contractors across the region now use his company exclusively, and he's become a go-to expert for HOA boards seeking legitimate towing services. His integrity turned a simple billing dispute into a catalyst for community justice. Sarah Kim's legal victory became a landmark case cited in HOA reform legislation across 3 states. Her successful prosecution of Bethany set precedents that protect homeowners from board abuse nationwide. She now specializes exclusively in HOA corruption cases and has a waiting list of communities seeking her help. The ripple effects continue spreading throughout our region. 12 other HOAs have requested voluntary audits after our story made national news. State legislators passed the Willowbrook Act, requiring annual financial transparency reports and criminal background checks for all HOA board candidates. Federal oversight of community associations has increased dramatically, with new penalties for board misconduct. Our annual Community Freedom Festival celebrates the anniversary of Bethany's arrest with food trucks, live music, and educational booths about homeowner rights. This year's festival raised $15,000 for a legal aid scholarship program that helps low-income families fight HOA abuse. The event has become a model for communities nationwide seeking to build solidarity and prevent future corruption. The scholarship fund operates from Edgar's old house, which the new board purchased as a community center using recovered stolen funds. Children now play where Bethany once plotted to destroy families, and the irony tastes sweeter than anything I've ever experienced. But the most satisfying change is personal. I found my place in this community as someone residents trust to fight for what's right. My electrical business has grown through referrals from neighbors who know I stand up to bullies, and I've helped 3 other communities expose similar corruption schemes. The phone rang yesterday with a call from a desperate homeowner 2 counties over whose HOA board is targeting families with fabricated violations and suspicious financial irregularities. The voice on the other end was shaking with fear, but also hope. "I heard what happened in Willowbrook. Can you help us?" I looked out at kids riding bikes safely in our streets, at neighbors chatting over garden fences, at Martha tending flowers that nobody will ever fine her for growing, and smiled. "We're on our way," I told them, because some fights are worth having, and some victories need to be shared. If you're trapped under an HOA tyrant's boot, share your story in the comments. Our legal defense network is growing stronger every day. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about ordinary people fighting extraordinary corruption and winning. Sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he inspires an entire army of slingshot warriors ready to take down the next giant.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and neighborhood showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.